Welcome to My Psychedelic Roots, a podcast of conversations with people from a broad swath of lived experience to explore their psychedelic beginnings, or roots, what led them to start using psychedelics, what those early experiences were like, and how those roots have impacted their life's unfolding. My name is Amy Bartlett, and it is my hope that these stories, generously shared by my guests, offer perspective and insight into the lived reality of psychedelic experiencing. Please feel welcome to subscribe and follow the show to get the latest conversations in your podcast feed. And you are always invited to share this episode with others if you feel inspired. And so, as always, whoever, wherever, or whenever you are, welcome. I'm glad you're here. In today's episode, I had the pleasure of sitting down with Pascal, a friend and community organizer who entered the psychedelic space through the legal ketamine clinic route. As we explore in our conversation together, she was born and raised in Ottawa, Canada, and spent much of her childhood outdoors, birdwatching and camping with her family, feeling playful, carefree, and deeply connected to the natural world. This was an anchoring Karen lost touch with as life unfolded, and as she grew older, she struggled with anxiety and depression. After exploring many different therapeutic approaches without lasting relief, it wasn't until her marriage unexpectedly ended and she experienced what she calls her life quake a few years ago, accompanied by a bout of suicidality, that psychedelics entered her life and she began ketamine therapy. We talk about what the clinical experience was like for her, the benefits she received, and the limits she experienced with that setting, as well as the deepening of her work with an experienced facilitator. I'm grateful to consider Karen a friend and have a deep respect and admiration for how she is steadily reclaiming her sense of self and place in the world. And as we talk about in our conversation together, how gracefully she has worked to resource herself with the community and experiences that have helped her ground in relationship with herself and the world around her. A reminder that this episode contains mentions of suicidality. This warning is meant to empower you with the knowledge you need to make healthy decisions about how and if you should consume this podcast content. We invite you to practice self-care and to do what feels right for you. And if you need support, please connect with someone who can help. Family and friends, professionals, or a crisis line. There are both Canadian and international recommendations in the show notes below. You are not alone, not in your pain, nor in your healing. And so, let's hear more about Karen's psychedelic roots. Karen, welcome.
Hi, Amy. It's a pleasure to speak with you today, and thank you for allowing me to share my story.
Yeah, I'm so pleased that you're here and that you're willing to share it. As we begin these conversations, I always like to give folks an opportunity to share a little bit about you, your background, your life today before we move into conversation together.
Sure. Thanks for that. I'm a very open, curious type of person.
Yeah.
Actually finding just coming back to that now where I was when I was a kid. I kind of lost sight of that. And I've been reconnecting with nature recently. I have a huge interest in psychedelic medicines, especially the neuroscience behind them. And I just want to help others on this path if they were to choose it as well.
Oh. Well, you're an active member of the Ottawa Psychedelic Education Network, our local psychedelic society, and helping organize events and being part of that leadership team. So you're already doing great work, and it's really a pleasure to get to sit down and talk with you on this more personal level.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, yeah. So you mentioned little Karen and your childhood. I wonder if we could go back and talk a little bit about you and your childhood before you encountered psychedelics. Thinking back to your younger self, what was your way of seeing the world, or what felt true to you when you were a kid?
When I was a kid, I didn't really think too much about the world around me and
Mhm.
the inner workings and outer workings. I just was kind of along for the ride. And I just remember always being out in nature, always having lots of trips with my parents and cousins, other family members, and just looking at the world with playfulness and wonder and awe.
Mm.
I didn't really think too much about the harder things in life until adulthood came along, of course.
Yeah. Did you grow up in an urban or rural environment?
I grew up in Ottawa in the West End. Back in the day, it was a lot less traffic there than it is now, but it is a very quiet neighborhood, very close to the woods, where I'd always be riding my bike out in the woods and building tree houses in the trees out there. So I always knew that I had a love for nature and just being inside in general.
Mhm. Did you feel safe as a child?
I did feel safe, but I felt anxiety ridden looking back.
Mm,
I did not have the words for it at the time, but I was always a bit of an anxious kid who always found that I was feeling a little dysregulated, but I didn't know why necessarily. I know that I used to love to swim all the time. I was constantly in water. And I've come to realize only in the past 2 years that I was desperately trying to regulate my nervous system by
mm.
being in the water. And that's why I swim as much as I can now.
That's great that you're giving yourself that outlet now that you wanted and felt as a kid. That's cool. I'm curious, what was your relationship to spirituality or wonder, awe when you were growing up? You've talked a little bit about your relationship to nature. I'm curious if that was part of your spirituality or if you grew up in a household that had a more traditional religious upbringing.
Well, I never really found that my parents were religious, but I do remember they used to make me go to church and take confirmation classes, which I hated. But I think my mother wanted me at the time to experience it, and then I could make my decision once I reached a certain age whether I want to continue going to church. I've never been religious. I'm still not religious. I never knew what the word spirituality actually meant until my 20s, and I feel a little late for the game there. But somebody had asked me once if I was religious. I said no, and they asked about spirituality. I thought it meant the same thing. I had no
Right.
clue that they were different. And just reflecting on this today, I think that maybe I did feel spiritual in nature. I just didn't have those words at the time. I didn't know what it was. But I just felt a oneness with the forest.
Hmm. And you felt that as a child.
Absolutely. Yes.
Oh, that's really cool. And I love that you've been able to reconnect with that as an adult.
It's been extremely important and very grounding for me.
Mm.
Yes.
I'm curious, as you were growing up, were drugs ever discussed, or were psychedelics ever discussed, or were they part of your consciousness at all?
Well, in high school, I remember a few friends doing drugs. I think it was hash, maybe a bit of cannabis. I never partook. I was always afraid of them. I think that that started when I first heard about the CIA conducting experiments with LSD back in the 60s. And
Mhm.
it was culture, around centered around fear of these drugs and medicines like that. And in high school, I had an acquaintance who actually was in a car accident and passed away. And I didn't know them well, but just someone who I went to school with. And I remember vividly, my mother had said the following week that she found out they were high as a kite, and those words stuck with me. And that scared me off of drugs, scared me straight, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
I was gonna say I never even heard psychedelics being discussed in my household. I don't ever remember a time that they were ever discussed. It was only when as I said, when I read about the LSD experiments from the CIA, and that scared me. They just, you see these videos of deranged people and acting all crazy, and I thought, well, I don't want any part of that.
Mm. And so, was there a particular moment or conversation or something that you read that made you reconsider or reimagine what psychedelics were?
Well, I know some people do consider cannabis to be a psychedelic.
Yes.
I started smoking cannabis in my 40s, and it was back when you could get a prescription for it. It was prescribed for anxiety, and later I used it for pain after a car accident. And I never had any psychedelic feeling on the cannabis, but that led me to start growing a few plants, learning about cannabinoids and terpenes. the different strains and what they're grown for, what they can help for. And then I started getting an interest in psilocybin.
Hmm.
And I thought to myself, and this is only a couple of years ago, I thought to myself, I would like to potentially try to do some psilocybin. And my doctor knew. I discussed it beforehand with him. And then I had what I like to call my life quake, where
Hmm.
my marriage ended, a long-term marriage of 33 years. And I was suicidal. My doctor had said, have you thought about ketamine? And I'm like, what's ketamine? I'd never heard of it. But luckily, he had a friend who had undergone ketamine therapy and he had great success. And the rest is history. He thought basically the ketamine would be more accessible and legal for me rather than
Right.
doing psilocybin.
Instead of pursuing the psilocybin route.
Mhm.
I'm sorry to hear about the life quake and hearing you talk about your reasons for engaging with cannabis, which were around trying to get some relief for your anxiety, and then having this big shakeup. How did you feel moving into having a ketamine experience? Did you have intentions? Were you just looking for any kind of relief?
I had basically tried so many modalities. And so I thought, well, what have I got to lose? Because I was in
Yeah.
a pretty bad state at that time mentally.
Mm.
And I didn't even feel the ketamine working on me, as in, like, I didn't feel any psychedelic effects or any altered states of consciousness, or that I was aware of really. But it
Mhm.
had a trickle down effect where for days afterwards, I could feel the suicidality disappear. And I felt my mood was boosted. And so I continued going to the ketamine clinic to do the assisted psychotherapy there for a while until I started working with the facilitator.
Can I ask a little bit about your ketamine experiences just to sort of understand? So you worked above ground at a
Yes,
legal ketamine clinic.
yes.
What was that process like? Because that's a unique experience that not everybody has of coming into the space through an above ground clinic. What was that like for you?
It was pretty quick actually, which I was surprised. I thought I was going to have to have weeks and weeks of waiting, but my doctor had filled out a form or referral, and next thing you knew, I was having some Zooms with the clinic, and they figured, yes, I'd be a good candidate, and I started, like, within 2 weeks.
Ah.
So it was really quick, and I think that psychedelics, though, even though I was never thinking about them and they weren't on my radar, they came to me when I was ready, not before, and it's something that I keep thinking about, this mantra, at just the right time was exactly as planned.
Mhm.
And I am actually very thankful in hindsight of the struggles that I had gone through in the last few years because they absolutely were necessary for me and they were a catalyst of sorts, if that makes any sense. But at the
It
time, of
does.
course, when you're in the muck, you think it's the worst thing happening into your life. But it's just when you kind of get out of that haziness afterwards, you could start seeing the path that you think, you know what, this was all for the best, really. And I don't know why it took me so long to consider psychedelics, to be honest. But maybe I wasn't ready before. Maybe I wasn't
Yeah.
ready to look at myself. I mean, it's very difficult and very humbling working with these medicines.
Yes.
Sometimes you are forced to look at things you don't consider to be very pretty about yourself and confronting your shadows head on. I don't think I ever was ready for that before my early 50s.
Yeah. How did you prepare for that first experience?
I didn't really have a lot of preparation. It wasn't like when I work with my facilitator now where you go in with an intention. It was very clinical. So it was kind of like going to a doctor's office, which very sterile. I mean, they have cushy chairs and everything. But I didn't really, it wasn't a lot of prep really. I just kind of showed up. I
Hmm.
got dropped off there and I got picked up. because you can't drive, of course.
Hmm.
But there was a lot of fear going into these sessions.
I bet.
There was a lot of fear. And even though I said I didn't feel anything psychedelic, quote unquote, going on, I did have a lot of fear that came up when I first started, my come up in the medicine. And I would be very fearful of the loss of control, I guess,
Yeah.
and the confusion. And I realized that that was probably just paralleling my confusion and loss of control that was playing out in my life at the present time.
Yeah. And so it sounds like a lot of those initial journeys with ketamine were maybe not pleasant in the journey itself, but you felt effects afterwards that provided some relief and some grounding.
That's absolutely true. It's one thing I could probably add is that I didn't feel anything spiritual happening.
Mhm.
That came a few sessions later when I started discovering what spirituality was, and we can talk about that in a bit.
Mhm.
But it was just very clinical, almost like I was taking this medicine. Okay, now it's going to work. And I'm like, okay, the medicine's going to fix me. It's not until I started working with these medicines for a while now that I've realized it doesn't fix you. It just is a tool to help you understand yourself better.
It's a nice way of putting it. And so you were working with ketamine in a clinical environment. Is there a point where those experiences shifted for you, or is there a point where you felt like you got as much as you could out of those experiences and shifted to another modality? How did that unfold for you?
Well, insurance will only pay for a certain amount. So, to be honest, I had to pivot. And I also wanted a different type of setting. I wanted to go deeper. I wanted to be able to take a higher dose than what was being offered at the clinic. And that's when I had sought out my facilitator, who has been instrumental along my journey, very skilled, very supportive. I've just been really lucky with that. And my therapist at the clinic as well, of course.
Mhm. And so moving into what you might consider to be your first really deep psychedelic experience, what was different between, some of the cannabis work that you did and the ketamine work that you did and some of these more meaningful or deeper experiences that you had subsequently?
My first time I worked with my facilitator, it was for ketamine.
Mhm.
And it was the first time where I felt an extreme amount of levity. And I also, I'd said to her after I came out of the medicine, I now know what the word afterglow means because I felt it. And I had felt just very light. And I realized that that was when I started really getting interested in the neuroscience behind these medicines and what they could do. And I've just been in awe of, of their power, basically.
Yeah. Karen, did you know others who had already explored psychedelics, or were you venturing into all of this unknown territory blind, as it were?
Blind. Absolutely. I knew nobody who had taken any psychedelics my whole life.
Wow.
Um, so it was very foreign territory to me. And I think that's why there was a lot of fear at the beginning because I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what was normal when I started feeling like my brain's kind of falling away. I didn't know if that was normal to feel that. And so a lot of fear had come up. And it only was when I started working with a somatic therapist, probably about a year and a half ago, that I really noticed a shift in the fear. It was a game changer for me as well.
Good. Your unfolding is very sort of titrated in a way. Cannabis for anxiety and then ketamine for a more suicidal rescue and then working with someone to really take you deeper. Is there an experience that you've had that you would consider your first?
Well, probably that first time working with a facilitator for our first ketamine session.
Mhm.
And I've always approached these medicines and these ceremonies, these journeys with intention.
Yes.
It's not something I do recreationally. I mean, I know recreational can be healing for some. For me, it just hasn't been like that. It just is kind of like work, work, work. It feels like it sometimes. But I had undergone a MDMA ceremony last year, and I had actually two intentions going into it, but one of them was to stop my cannabis use because it had become numbing at this point. Just something to numb my feelings because I didn't think I was able to tolerate them. And I remember coming out of the medicine that night, just overlooking the most powerful and beautiful sunset I've ever seen on the Ottawa River. And I just said to myself, that's it. You don't need it anymore. And didn't stop right away, but it was pretty close to that. And I just realized that I'm okay. I'm safe. I'm safe to feel these things now. I'm able to tolerate. My window of tolerance had gotten a lot wider, I guess you could say.
Yeah. That's lovely. I'm so glad that you had that experience and felt safe to renegotiate your relationship with a plant teacher that it sounds like was supportive for a long time for you.
Oh, definitely. And I finally got around to the psilocybin ceremony last year that I originally wanted to do before everything fell apart in my life. And it was at just the right time. I think that if I had done that first before the ketamine, it'd be a lot different outcome for me.
Mm.
I really would, because psilocybin tends to shake you up, whereas ketamine is a disassociative, and it just allows a bit of space between these hard feelings and you feeling the brunt of them. So I'm glad that it unfolded the way it did. And to be honest with you, the psilocybin ceremony I had, I was feeling the after effects for months later, months. The benefit was just incredible. The insights I gained about myself as well as my place in the world, people around me. I just kind of wish sometimes that I had come to all this a lot sooner in my life.
And yet, as you said before, everything in its own time.
That's true. That's true.
Has there been a specific insight, vision, or feeling from your initial experiences that have stayed with you or that you're continuing to integrate?
That's a good question. There's a lot of them. I think that what has been sticking with me the longest and has been omnipresent is just conquering limiting beliefs. It's given me a lot of confidence that I could do things in life that I didn't think I could do. So I think that that's been the biggest thing for me, the benefit that I've received from these medicines.
Mm. And I'm curious, Karen, when did spirituality enter your psychedelic experiencing?
Probably around the third or fourth ketamine session at the clinic. As I
What?
said, I never knew what spirituality meant. And then all of a sudden I started feeling a connectedness with things. Crazy things started happening, like synchronicities. Things just were popping up out of nowhere. I could see direct links to things. I started seeing my place in the world and realizing that everything is connected in a way, I guess you could say. So that's when I first felt the spiritual aspect of it. It was pretty quick, actually, after I started the ketamine.
You know, I really love how you describe that and how linked it sounds to some of those main lessons around limiting beliefs. You know, it's hard to think we don't have a place in the world when we feel our place in the world. That connection between your psychological healing and your spiritual opening, to me, I don't mean to impose, but there's a link that I hear there that feels
No, you're
really,
correct.
yeah, that feels really beautiful.
Absolutely. Hmm.
Uh,
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's cool. Karen, is there anything that you wish you had known before you started on the psychedelic path?
I come back to a Brené Brown quote that I like, that we can be brave and afraid at the same time,
Yes.
because I used to be paralyzed by fear and not wanting to start anything because I needed to see the outcome. in order for me to feel safe and to take some chances. But now as I said, I kind of see that things are connected, things happen for a reason. I'm noticing the synchronicities in my life, and it just kind of gives me a bit of comfort that things are going to work out okay. And it's okay to go ahead and take the steps along a path that looks terrifying because you cannot see the end of the path. And just having trust that your path will become clear as you walk it.
That's beautiful. You talked at the beginning about your connection with nature as a child. I'm curious what role nature might play in your life today.
Well, I've been finding a tremendous amount of joy being out into nature the last few years. I put down my bird photography, which I was heavily into after my separation. And I only picked it up last April again, and I've resumed with a vengeance. But I'm very thankful for all the people that I've met on the trails. My parents always used to say, "Don't talk to people, strange people in the woods." Well, that's some of my best relationships. I've started by doing that. And it's just really nice to be able to spend time with other people that are connected with nature, finding new lifers, new birds that I've never seen before. It's just been very nice feeling connected. And because I felt so much healing happening in nature, I've started to do some hikes with people. I've been taking some people into the woods, forest bathing. I'm actually doing a certification in forest bathing as we speak. And I want people to try that modality. I just figured if it's worked for me, it might work for some others as well, and they might not know it. And it's just kind of like a reconnection for me because I used to have this when I was a kid and I felt alive in nature and I felt happy and light. And it's only now that I'm actually reconnecting with that inner child.
Hmm. I'm curious if this reconnection with nature is connected to the spiritual opening that you're navigating and approaching with curiosity.
I believe so. Strange things have happened in the last little while that I thought people would think I'm nuts, but my friends all know me now. Just about feeling energy in the forest, and I have a favorite tree at my favorite trail in Ottawa at Mud Lake, and I hug it every time, and I used to apologize to my friends when I'm like, "I have to hug my tree, sorry." And now it's I don't care, and I just do it. They stand there and watch me and ask me if I need a moment with my tree. But I feel nature around me, and when I think back to when I was a kid, I probably felt it then too. I just did not have words for it, and I didn't understand what it was. I just felt alive. But I guess that's part of the spirituality I'm feeling now is just feeling like everything is connected.
Hmm. Well, it's beautiful. I'm so glad that you've reconnected and remembered some of the wisdom that you had and contained as a child, and that's now part of your resourcing and part of your lived experience. That's
And I also have been feeling a lot of just gratitude in general. I've never actually felt a lot of gratitude in my life, and I feel bad saying that, but it wasn't until starting with these medicines that I started just really appreciating people in my life, and I didn't have a lot of support around me after my marriage ended. I really did not. I'd been isolating as well, so I had to forge community wherever I could, and whether that was at the pool where I do a lot of swimming, with my birding friends, photography friends, with the open community, and I just realized that we do heal in community. And you've heard me say that before, and I'm a firm believer of it, and actually, my word of the year for 2026 is community. So
true.
I think it's fitting.
It very much is. I'm so glad that you've been able to resource yourself, not just with the supports, but also with the medicines and the people and nature, the birds, the trees, feeling that abundance of support.
Feels very nice to have that support. I don't feel so alone anymore. And I think that's a big part of it is that for a long time I felt very alone. maybe in my views of the world or just the way I was. I found people that are very like-minded, and it feels really good being around them, and I have a tremendous amount of gratitude, and especially with the open community, I wanna be able to help people who might be choosing this path for themselves, for their own healing journeys, and, if I could help out in any way, that would make me feel really good because, as I said, I didn't have that support originally when I had first
Yeah.
started this.
Well, on that note, as we begin to wrap up our conversation, what's one of the most important lessons you've learned along your path, or what advice might you give to someone who's contemplating moving in this space or is moving in this space and looking for some guidance or support?
Well, for me, I don't like giving advice so much on psychedelics other than saying what is true for me, and for me, having that support there, having I'm glad that I came to it with the legal framework, with the ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. It's more controlled, I guess, so I had a lot of support. I am so lucky that I found a great facilitator who, as I said, is very skilled, very knowledgeable, very caring, and gave me that unwavering support. And you can do this work alone. For me, I'm glad I didn't have to because I do not think that I would be able to integrate my experiences. And the experience tends to fade unless you actually integrate it into your life. It seems to be a shame. I think it's a shame if you don't do something with the learned insights. And
How do you
yeah,
integrate? Or what kinds of things do you do to help keep the experience alive and meaningful for you?
I'm always trying to push my comfort zone. I've been working on that, especially the last few months. And I just figure if it scares me, do it. I mean, if it's safe, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I mean, it's if I don't take chances, I'm going to regret them that I never started or I never attempted something. So that's what I'm trying to do now is just be brave. Just be brave, get some confidence. And by pushing myself, that's the way I integrate it. And of course, the nature component of it as well. I just feel very grounded and centered when I'm out in the woods. And that helps me reflect, especially on my journeys. Even if I'm not thinking about them, my body feels into them. And it just allows the experience to settle in my body a bit.
Thinking about all the anxiety as a kid and the anxiety you were trying to treat with the cannabis and your big life quake, and how bravery is the antidote that you're pursuing in your healing and in your integration. It's really beautiful and feels very full circle in a lot of ways.
Thank you. Yes,
Mhm.
I'm very proud of that component that I'm actually starting to really push myself.
Yeah. Well, Karen, it's been such a pleasure to hear your story and to learn a little bit about how you've been navigating this unfolding. Thank you so much for all the work you're doing in community and all your offerings to folks to connect with nature and benefit in some of the ways that you've been able to benefit. It's a real pleasure to know you and to hear your story.
Appreciate that, Amy, and I wanna thank you for your leadership in the, Ottawa Psychedelic Education Network,
Mm.
the community, because you've given me a sense of purpose in a way. I just know that I want to, stay in this space, and I wanna help others with their individual journeys in any way that I can, so thank you very much for holding space for me today, and it was really helpful actually for me to reflect on my own journey as well.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you, Karen. Really
Thank
lovely.
you.
Mm.